Okay, everyone. Christ is born. Let us glorify him. Христос się рождає. It's wonderful to see so many of you. I was just gazing at the candles that burn brightly beside many of the art projects that we've had at St. Stephen's. And I have the pleasure this morning of introducing Dr. Carolyn. But, you know, it kind of goes both ways. I said a little bit to her about you and the work that you have done in this parish to help build this beautiful building. The number of spiritual programs, children's programs, adult programs, and all the things that you have done for so many years to contribute to our parish. So I described you to Dr. Carolyn as saints in the making. Maybe some of you already are in that role, but more importantly, are incredible friends of St. Stephen's. We love you dearly, and it is just wonderful that you are here with us praying, not just with Ukraine, but learning a little bit more about the saints. And now for Dr. Carolyn. Dr. Carolyn Musig did her graduate studies at the University of Toronto, the Pontifical Institute of Medieval Studies, and at the University of Montreal. Since July of 2020, she is the chair of Christian Thought in the Department of Classics and Religion at the University of Calgary. Previously, she taught in the Department of Religion and Theology in the University of Bristol in the UK for 25 years, where she was head of department and served as director of the University of Bristol's Institute for Research in the Humanities and Arts, and also co-director of the Center for Medieval Studies. She has written on the history of stigmata, and if you're not sure what that is, I'm sure she'll explain that to you, medieval preaching, monasticism, Francis of Assisi, Catherine of Siena, and female educators in the Middle Ages. Carolyn enjoys public engagement activities, and I think this is one, if not her first in a while, that bring together academics, that bring together the church and the wider community. Presently, she is working on a book that investigates female preaching and their sermons in the late medieval and early modern Europe. She greatly enjoys supervising PhD students and meeting so many promising and inspiring students. I'll let Dr. Carolyn explain how the two of us connected, and that was almost 2 years ago, I guess. Wow, time goes by very quickly, when she came to Canada, and it has just been a delightful friendship and an honor to work with her in the important work that she does. So with that, will you please join me in welcoming Dr. Carolyn Musig.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you so much, Linda. Can everybody hear me okay? I first want to thank you for inviting me to St. Stephen Proto-Martyr Church. As Linda says, this is my first public engagement in almost 2 years, and so it's a very special moment for me. And in many ways, I feel like I'm coming home again just by being here. When I first came to Canada, I'm originally from New York. I moved to Toronto to do my postgraduate studies, and I couldn't find a place. And the people who took me in was St. Vladimir's, the Ukrainian community that's very near to the University of Toronto, where I made so many friends, and I learned about Ukrainian beautiful Catholic liturgy by going to weddings and baptisms, and today brought great joy to my heart to be here and to see the beautiful service, Father Michael, and I'm glad you're feeling better, and I'm glad that I was here to be here with your coming back to St. Stephen's. And I've known Linda, yes, for 2 years. As Linda mentioned, I'm chair of Christian Thought at the University of Calgary, and part of that is arranging public engagement talks, usually not by me, but by other people, to come to Calgary and engage with the Calgary community, with different Christian communities, and to make people aware of the richness of Christian culture, Christian belief, Christian faith, art, music, the beautiful music that we heard just now. And so those are the different ways that I engage with academe and also with public appreciation of Christianity. And so Linda told me that there was a new series here on the Seniors Guest Presentation Series. And when she asked me if I would like to give a talk, it was generally related to the lives of saints. I originally thought maybe I would speak about a saint that both Linda and I have very much appreciation for, is Catherine of Siena, a 14th century Wonder Woman, really, who was engaged in so many different political and religious reforms. But I thought maybe perhaps it would be better to look at a different type of woman and a different type of, I guess you could say, saint. She's not officially canonized. Julian of Norwich is who I'll be speaking about today. But she was quite a theologian, quite an inspiration. And I'm really excited by what she says and what she thinks and what she writes. So I just want to introduce you a little bit to some terms and who she is, and then talk about her theology, because her theology is very much a theology of prayer. And that's why I thought it would be good to speak about Julian of Norwich today, because she was a woman of prayer, of constant prayer. So Julian of Norwich, although it seems like a long time ago, and indeed it was, the 14th century, is known as an anchoress and a recluse of St. Julian's Church in Norwich, England. Now, I don't know if you've come across the term anchoress or recluse before, but in the Middle Ages, it wasn't uncommon for women and men to live adjacent to a church. So, for instance, in a church like St. Stephen's, Julian would have a room attached to what would face onto the altar, so she could watch the daily liturgy and pray and be in contemplation. So it was a person who lived their life in dedication, attached really to the church. That's why they're called anchorists, because they're within an enclosure, or a recluse because they are living usually on their own. And so Julian was an anchoress who was involved every day in prayer, contemplation, and spiritual counsel. That's the other thing. People would come to Julian's room, which would have a window, and people would come and seek counsel, spiritual counsel. So although there is, of course, the institutional church and the sacramental, Julian fulfilled very much a way of giving guidance and spiritual inspiration to people who were in sometimes very stressful situations. Now, the other thing that I want to just say about Julian before I launch into her thought and her theology is that her thought and theology arises from a series of visions that she experienced. And so let me just say a little bit about visions and how I'm talking about them, because sometimes it may seem strange to us. You know, what are these visions? What do we make of them? And so I guess in a very simplified way, we could say that medieval people sometimes understood their world through the imagination and dreams, and by trying to interpret them as a way of understanding God's message and how it would lead to salvation. So visions were a very important aspect of understanding God's plan. So the way we think about imagination, dreams, would be for them a way of trying to get into the insights of what God is trying to tell us, what messages are being sent. And we know about Julian's revelations, her visions, because they are captured, luckily, in a book called The Revelations of Divine Love. So luckily we have this book that survives from the hundreds and hundreds of years ago that relay Julian's visions. So let me just tell you a little bit about the Revelations of Divine Love. Now, Julian had 16 visions, and the circumstances are very dramatic of what happened when she experienced these visions. She was 30 years old. She was not yet a recluse. All we know is that she was believed to be on her deathbed. She had already received her last rites, and the parish priest who knew Julian and believed that she was in her last hours of life came to her bedside and prayed with her and her family who were surrounding her, and held up a crucifix as he prayed for her soul and as he prayed for her good deliverance to heaven. And it's at that moment when he puts the crucifix in front of Julian's face that she starts to experience her divine revelations. And it starts out with a very vivid sense that Jesus is in the room with her, crucified on the cross. She could almost feel the hot blood trickling down from the crown of thorns. It's an extremely vivid image. This starts her series of visions. So her visions start within the passion of Christ, within the suffering of Christ. And it's within that she starts to have a series of revelations, of understanding about her faith. What's most important is that she understood before, but never could she understand so well now, that the passion was the defeat, the passion of Christ was the defeating of the devil. The humanity had been delivered from evil. And so the passion becomes very vivid, very real, very immediate for her. And she experiences emotions as well. Part of the visions are a series of her feeling sorrowful for human sin and for the passion of Christ, for his actual physical suffering and torment, but joy at the deliverance of humanity and the willingness of Jesus to suffer on the cross. And during these visions, she has dialogue with Jesus. And he says to her, I am very happy to have suffered for you. And if I could have suffered more, I would have done that. And so there's these feelings of great mercy that she is experiencing, and she feels the beauty of divine love during this very dramatic moment in her life. As she's experiencing these visions, she understands very powerfully that God is in all things. And she really understands that. She gets this sense that God is everywhere, including within each and every individual. And that brings her great comfort, understanding that. And God affirms, confirms, and reassures Julian that despite sin and suffering and the pain that every individual may go through, all shall be well. That might be a phrase that you've come across before. Julian of Norwich is famous for saying, all shall be well, or it's God who tells her, all shall be well. So this is a very powerful experience for Julian. Of course, she rallies. She doesn't die, luckily. She lives to tell the tale of these visions and insights that she has of Jesus on the cross and what God tells her, and of the Holy Spirit. She experiences the Trinity as well. These are all things. She sees the Virgin Mary, all the things that she desired with her heart before this illness fell upon her. But what is really powerful, I think, about Julian's situation is that when she's given this gift, as she understands it, of understanding, she's conflicted about how does she tell people about this? Because she feels that, why did God give this to me? I'm sure it's from God, but at the same time, should I speak of it? Is it right? She was a very humble person, and she was worried about the way she might be perceived as saying that this is what God said. But she is compelled to share this because she comes to the conclusion that the gift is not for her, but it's for all Christians, as she calls them, her fellow Christians, as she says. And not to say anything would be the wrong thing. And so she goes to tell her tale of these visions, and that's how they get recorded. That's why we know about them. And what comes through is a very beautiful theology, and it's a very positive theology. It's a theology of forgiveness and inclusivity. Julian feels that she has a glimpse of not how humans see themselves, but how God sees humans. And she believes that God has an unconditional love for humanity, that God does not blame the human for sin, but forgives humanity for their sins, and that humanity suffers for their sins, and God is sorry for that and has a complete and compassion for humanity. So Julian sees that God is within each person, and this is part of the understanding of her sense of love for humanity. It's a sense that God and the human, if in tune, are always together. God is always there. And this is where her prayer comes in. Goodness is in humanity, but it's up to the human, up to the individual, to find that goodness through prayer. And what is prayer for Julian? Prayer for Julian is exactly what the visions were doing for her. It's giving her an insight into God's will. So if the individual tries to understand God's will, then all will be well. And that is all that can be expected of the individual. But it's hard work trying to do God's will, as Julian will clearly say. So it's prayer and searching for God. That is the start of where the Christian should be to live a good life. Now, you might think that Julian may sound naive, or maybe she had it easy, but she didn't. She lived at a time, indeed, that was very different from ours, but I would say it also was very similar. She was a little girl when the Black Death hit Europe, where within a year, a third of the entire population was dead from the Black Death. This is when she grew up. And the plague came often and fiercely. So she knew plague very, very well. She knew war very well. This was a time of war between England and many different countries. So there was a time of death, famine, and great uncertainty. And I think this is where Julian ironically finds her positivity. Because as that recluse attached to the Church of St. Julian, that's where she gets her name from, by the way. We don't actually know her name. She names herself after the church that she's attached to. But it's people who would come to the church looking for spiritual direction, who must have been extremely stressed, anxious about their salvation, about their life, about living and dying. And Julian was there to reassure them that all will be well, that God is within, and that is all one needs to remember. It's a difficult thing perhaps to understand, but Julian had this clarity and this faith and this belief that was so powerful that I think her compassion just comes through the ages. And the people in her lifetime were so dedicated to this idea that they copied down her visions and gave them to us. So what I'd like to do is just introduce you to one vision so you can get a sense of Julian's message, the power of her message, the positivity of her message, and I think the beauty of her message that made her counsel so important to those around her. So I don't know if everyone has a handout, but I'll read it out. On the back of the handout, I've given her 16th and final revelation, and it gives you a taste of the nature of her visions. And this is what she says. Our Lord opened my spiritual eyes and showed me my soul in the middle of my heart. I saw my soul as large as if it were a kingdom, and from the properties that I saw in it, it seemed to me to be a glorious city. In the center of that city sits our Lord Jesus, true God and true man, glorious highest Lord, and I saw him dressed imposingly in glory. He sits in the soul, in the very center, in peace and rest, and he rules and protects heaven and earth and all that is. The manhood and the Godhead sit at rest, and the Godhead rules and protects without any subordinate or any trouble. And my soul was blissfully filled with the Godhead, which is supreme power, supreme wisdom, supreme goodness. In all eternity, Jesus will never leave the position which he takes in our soul, for in us is his most familiar home and his favorite dwelling. So this, I think, gives us a sense of what Julian means when she says God is within. Jesus sits at the center of the human soul. All creation is good, and humanity is the best indication of that. And within that creation, Jesus, the divine, never leaves the soul, because the soul is God's creation. And with that, there's a certainty in Julian that she sees great hope and possibility in every individual because of that closeness. And that is what she focuses on. She doesn't deny that there is suffering, that there is pain, but it's that hope, that possibility, and for her, this strong reality and realization of the presence of Christ within every single person. So I will stop there, and I'm very happy to take any questions or comments, whatever. I'd be very welcome to hear your views.
Thank you, Dr. Carolyn. A couple of questions that come to mind that maybe our audience is thinking about is there a church of St. Julian? Where might that be located if we were to ever travel there?
Mm-hmm.
And have there been any miracles as a result since her passing?
Right. The Church of St. Julian is in Norwich. It's still standing. The recluse holding where she was destroyed in World War II, so it's no longer there. But if you go to Norwich, which is a beautiful place in England, it's on the East Coast, and it's just north of London. It's a lovely place, so that's where you can go. There are, now, as I said at the outset, Julian herself is not officially canonized, but part of that, I think, is because we don't know the full details of her life, and there are no miracles attached to Julian as a person. But what I would say, and I think a case could be made, is that the influence, let me just see if I can find it in here. Oops, I've just destroyed my book of Julian of Norwich here. The book of Revelations, the Revelations of Divine Love, has been circulating now. It's become very popular in the last, I would say, 100 years. It's been translated into numerous languages. And even within the last 20 years, it has become a very important book for many people who may not even consider themselves religious or spiritual. But when they come to Julian, they start to think about religion, I think, in a different way. So I would argue that Julian's writings kind of almost have a miraculous effect on people's attitudes to the place of religion in their lives. So yes, I think this is where we can find out most about Julian, is the Book of Revelations. And if anyone's interested in buying that book, I give a little bit of information on where they can get a very nice, clear translation. It was in Middle English, which is not too difficult to read, but modern English is a bit easier for us. But what I put on your handout on the back is, I would say, the best translation.
Linda, I think that you mentioned stigmata. Did Julian experience stigmata?
That's a very interesting question. The Book of Revelations, this might sound a little bit shocking to us, starts out with Julian praying to God to have 3 wounds: the wounds of compassion, the wounds of devotion, and the wounds of suffering, in order to understand Jesus's life and death. So one could say that she prayed in a way to experience a form of stigmatization through feeling in her heart the wounds of Christ. But Julian, if we think about the actual wounds bearing on her body, no. But for Julian, it's representative of how she feels within her contemplation of trying to empathize with those feelings of the passion that Jesus experienced during his passion.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation this morning. It's wonderful to hear from you. I was just curious, knowing what you do know about the people of the Middle Ages, what sort of virtues would you say that they sort of demonstrate that can be a lesson for us in our times? And then also, what do we sort of do better than they did? Do you know what I mean? There's no golden age.
Yeah.
And so, what can we learn from each other, I guess, in that way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing we can learn from people like Julian and medieval people is the embrace and acceptance that life is difficult, that people will encounter suffering and death, and they do not shy away from that. And so they were prepared. Because of discussing their difficulties, their fears, and by embracing that and being honest with it, and then having a deep faith, I think, is also something that is a gift. But it's something that was nurtured, I think, more easily. Did this just go off? Can you hear me? Okay. Was nurtured more easily because of the people like Julian and the support of spiritual nourishment that was given. So I think this sense of spiritual maturity that was started from birth to death. And in fact, there was a sense that people should prepare to die well. And so there's this real pragmatic but yet spiritual dimension to medieval life and medieval experience, and an honesty there. And I think a willingness to be humbled, because they had so much less control over their world, over their environment. And there's a strong humility, which I think is so important, really, isn't it? So I think those things we could look to, and I think that's why Julian's book maybe touches a chord for a lot of people, because it's full of that sort of sensibility. What they could learn from us is, now I do talk about Julian being somewhat inclusive. I have the term inclusivity on the handout, which I didn't mention. But I think that was an exception. I think in the Middle Ages there was a much more us and them sense of existence. And Julian grew up in a world where she wouldn't know anybody but a Christian. She wouldn't know Jews or Muslims or any just Christians. That might help her be inclusive. She sees God loving every human. But I think our sense that it's important to understand the other and put ourselves in the shoes of other people, and I think that's becoming more and more pronounced. I know at the university, this is a big area that we are constantly discussing, and really everywhere in politics is becoming aware of other people's situation and being sensitive to that. And I think that would have made the Middle Ages a much better place. Yeah.
So basically, Julian got or had her revelations on her deathbed initially.
Yeah.
Now, I think that being on your deathbed kind of brings a person to a different sense of acknowledgement as to how your life has gone and everything else. But what I'm curious about is what was her life, spiritual life, like prior to the revelations? I mean, was there anything that kind of helped lead her to this place?
That's another great question, because we don't know too much about Julian except her revelations. But at the very beginning of her book, she indicates, this is before she has her visions, this is when she prays for her illness. She prays for her suffering and the wounds so she can understand God. She also prayed for an illness, which I didn't mention. She prayed to experience an illness in order to show other people, an illness that she would recover from though, but to show other people the changeableness of life. So she wanted to be an example for others of life's fleetingness, and that whilst here, one needs to do their best. And so we get a sense that before she's a recluse, she's definitely somebody who's devout and religious. She's living in the world, but she's a person who is dedicated to prayer. And when she prays for these things, she always says, but only if this is your will, God. I only want this if this is your will, because I may be praying for the wrong things, but only make it happen if this is what you want. So that's really all we get a sense of, that she's a devout person, and that she is very concerned about the human condition and about her relationship with God, which I guess is a little bit of detail, but it's in broad strokes. But it's a very enticing question. We don't know enough about Julian.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow, that was wonderful. At this time, if there are no other questions, I have a couple of announcements, but we'll do the thank you first, and then I'd like to share two other things that are coming up that you can look forward to seeing. One is the Calgary Interfaith Council is doing an International Harmony Week in Calgary. That's starting February the 1st to the 7th, and that is going to be, you'll be able to watch it on Zoom. So I'll share a little bit about that, and you'll get an email as well. And the second one is, I'm sure you're just on the edge of your seats to say, well, who's coming in February? Remember, we do this the last Wednesday of every month. So I'll give you a little peek into what's happening next month. But at this time, I'd like to call Bernadette, please, to thank Dr. Carolyn.
Christ is born. Христос рождається. What a beautiful way we started out our Wednesday morning with celebrating our divine liturgy, thanks to Father Mike, praying for our brothers and sisters in Ukraine, and getting a blessing with holy water afterwards, again thanks to Father Mike, and then our wonderful presentation with Dr. Carolyn. Thank you so much. That was very, very informative. And thank you for the handouts too. And I would like to thank Linda for organizing our guest speaker today. On behalf of St. Stephen's, I would like to present you with a token. And do you want to do the book, or you're okay? It's a book about St. Stephen's.
Oh.
I'll be Vanna, if you wish. This book is the work of a lot of people, and some of those people are present today, and the tribute really goes to them. It's amazing, and I know you're going to love it, because it's all about St. Steve.
Oh, beautiful.
So
Thank you.
Our committee members, or those of you that contribute, could you just please stand and give us a wave? Please, I know it's going to take a few minutes. Come on, do it. There we are. There's some of them. They work, and
Thank
there
you.
are some
Beautiful.
individuals that have since passed, and their names are also indicated.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really been a great pleasure, and thank you for welcoming me home, my new home in Calgary. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I want to do a quick pick. Bernadette. Okay. So a quick photo moment. Father Michael, can you join us very quickly, please? Thank you. Dr. Carol, we have to come back. Okay, can you do a quick pick with us? Thank you. We'll do it when you're ready. We'll quickly slide them down. Say, ready, set, go. Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to say, Father? Okay, perfect. All right. I think we promised to wrap up at 11 o'clock, and it is just that now. So 2 reminders again, please. Actually 3, but 2. You will receive information via email. If for whatever reason you miss the information, this has to do with the Calgary Interfaith Council. Father Michael is part of that council, and when Dr. Carolyn talked about many faiths gathering together, that is exactly what it is. Every faith in Calgary coming together to pray for healing, wholeness, and hope of whatever suffering they may have endured, whether it be the pandemic or other. So that's happening from February the 1st to the 7th. It's going to include a presentation by our mayor. It's going to include also different visitations from different faith centers or churches or places of worship. So you'll be able to read a lot about that, and that will be out. If not, just Google Calgary International Harmony Week. And the second one is our speaker in February is an artist. And her name is Christine. I'll be sending out more information in the bulletin. And she is going to be speaking about fear and spirituality, how fear and prayer and spirituality through art. So if you attend that session, be prepared to do a little artwork. And she's bringing all the supplies, even if it happens in the church. We don't know how that will happen, but we're excited to have her, and she is excited to come. So another new friend. Carolyn, you are welcome anytime, and we wish you all the best at the U of C in your new role. And God bless you with health and happiness, and may one day we see each other in a meeting without masks. So, and then thirdly, in the spirit of safety and still being able to socialize with each other and to say hello, we ask you to please be careful as you leave, and do visits outside, please. Okay, and not in the foyer. Is there anything, Father, that I may have missed? There's liturgy tomorrow at 9 o'clock as well. Cantor team that are there, some may have left to go back to work. We had a full cantor team and a couple of understudies. I don't know how that happens, but anyway, well done. Thank you so much for helping, and it gave me an opportunity. So if you'd like to express your appreciation to the musicians in the loft, wherever you are, there we go. Okay, everybody. Christ is born. Let us glorify him. Christos rождается. I almost said Slavi Susidistu, but that's coming.